welcome to today's webinar, which is our employment legislation update. We are going to be joined by Maria Lawless today, who is the HR Director for Signature Associates. Maria's just having a little, there she is.
Sorry, I was just wondering for the link. I'm just
okay. So we're live now, and I was just saying that you were just having a little difficulty joining us, but you're with us. Are you in Saudi at the moment, Maria?
I am, yes, I am. Yeah. And funny enough, as big as the airport is, you cannot get a plug anywhere. I'm just putting stuff away, so it's not in my background. Okay. Yeah. So Michaela, we're going to share the slides. I think Michaela was going to give us a hand and stuff like that, so everything's ready.
Yes, it is. So as I was saying, Maria is the HR Director for Signature Associates, and she has a diverse background with different industries and will be able to give us some insights. We have a few polls as well throughout the presentation that have been set up. The session is being recorded, just so that everybody knows. If you have any questions, if you put them in the question box, and then we'll go through the questions at the end. But otherwise, I'm going to hand over to Maria for today's presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. I'm just going to share my screen because I want to take you through some slides that we'll send to you after the webinar. So it's lovely to meet everybody. Thank you, Liz, for having us. It's really a pleasure to be here. We love to get the opportunity to speak to people about the exciting topic of employment law, funny enough. Some people might say it's not the most exciting topic, but I can tell you what, it's certainly an important one at the moment. So let me just get started. I'm going to take you through quite a lot of detail here, but again, we do this on a monthly basis with our own business. So we were delighted when Liz opened up the opportunity to join Crowe Corporate Services. And as I said, there will be free downloadables and the slides you will get to use in your business. So again, if you're working in your business and you want to engage with your senior stakeholders about the importance of this, but maybe it's not as important on the business strategy topic, or you need some assistance in kind of communicating what's changing to them, please feel free to use these slides. We're also available for a cup of coffee online if you're looking to ask any questions. For us, it's all about building relationships, and the free education part of this for us is absolutely key. It's not just exposure about the services that we do. That's where we build our best relationships, because when people come to us with employment law questions, they're really sometimes in a desperate state because either something has gone wrong, or they just are struggling in terms of maybe even the relationship with somebody that they've worked with for a number of years. So we'll cover off lots and lots of information. Michaela, who works with me as a marketing manager, is going to quickly run a poll with us as well in a few minutes. And the reason we do that is because we want to see what the state is in the room. What are you experiencing? What are your pain points? It also helps us as well to get, it helps us work on our social media in terms of what we're posting, what we're sending out is really, really useful, because with the feedback that we get on our webinars, what happens is we then base our content on a lot of that feedback. So you're probably seeing employment law LinkedIn posts for months now, because again, this all started towards October of last year. It was kind of where the big conversations were. It was all over social media and all over the news. But again, there's a timeline also we'll talk about with what's coming when, and that should be really, really useful for you. So just to introduce myself quickly, I am the Managing Director and Founder of Signature Associates. We are a HR and finance consultancy. I've worked across the corporate world for about 25 years and in different industries, different sectors. I love them all. No sector, we're not sector agnostic in terms of what we cover. Realistically, your argument could be, well, people are the same in every business. They can be, but again, it's about personalizing people's strategies to work with the businesses that you're working with. So we work with clients on a strategic HR basis, fractional HR directors, finance directors, but also then on a retained model, which would be you don't have an internal HR function. How do you then ensure that you have somebody to pick up the phone to, you know what you should have in your contracts, you know what you should have in your policies and so on. So we've got a good team across the globe. Funny enough, we pick up quite a lot of global work, but we also have a huge team around projects as well, which can cover anything from restructuring to scaling up, closing businesses. It could be people going into new regions, setting up new teams. How do we support that? And then on the finance side, it's much the same from a strategic finance leadership point of view, and then everything from bookkeeping, payroll services, and accountancy. So I understand we have a lot of accountants in the call, so we work closely with accountancy firms, so definitely would love to connect. Please connect with me on LinkedIn as well, because we often have queries in that space that or partners that we need to support our clients. So please reach out. In terms of learning and development, that's a newer area for us. We also provide fully bespoke management development programs, and then our off-the-shelf type courses that maybe small to medium businesses would often come to us for and ask about, in terms of, diversity and inclusion, managing teams, train the trainer, all of that sort of stuff. So again, what we want to be is a trusted business partner. It's not just about volumes of clients. It's about making sure that clients are happy and that they have a good service, and they can sleep at night knowing that their people or finance challenges are being met or delivered. So, as I said, there's quite a lot to get through, but that's why we share the slides at the end of it. We want you to take something away. Realistically, I'm going to give you a little bit around what we're seeing, and we are certainly seeing quite a lot. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, a lot of my LinkedIn posts over the last week or two have been very honest and very open, and they've had quite a lot of engagement. And again, we'll talk a little bit about what that was about and the trends that are coming through. But again, just to give you a bit of a kind of an idea as to what we're going to cover off. That will give you such quite a meaty session today. So Michaela, I'm going to hand over to you, if that's okay, to run the poll.
Yeah, I'm running the first poll. If you can see, launch.
Okay, so again, as I said, the reason we like to check this is just to see what the state of play is in the room, and then how can we deliver content and educational tools that will help you. So why today we are talking about AI. We're talking about AI in the world of employee relations. But how has it impacted it? What are we seeing? What are you seeing in your organizations? We did a very good webinar about last month on implementing AI across your organization and the watch outs for that. So we learned quite a lot ourselves, because we've got a GDPR expert that works with us, but she's very big on the AI space. So what we're now working on ourselves is an internal audit of our own company as to, well, we have to be informing customers and clients that we're using AI. They have to be in your contracts. You have to have the human element checking and so on. So we'll cover off the employee relations side of this today, but again, just useful to discuss. Okay, so there's quite a lot of you using it daily, which is what I would expect. We love it ourselves. It creates efficiencies in our business, but it has to be done properly. Okay, so that's a good response. And others occasionally, a lot of you using it occasionally. Okay, that's helpful. Okay, and then obviously there's a number of common tools that people are using. So again, it's just to give you an idea, because again, ChatGPT was the most popular one until Claude started to introduce itself, and then people seem to have switched. So, and there's a long list of others that we haven't got included here. Okay, interesting. So a lot of ChatGPT. Okay, Michaela, you can move on to the next one. Yeah, so your AI, and the reason I'm talking about AI, as I said, and I'll cover in a few minutes, around how this is impacting employee relations. And then you have, I suppose, there's one great example where there's many business owners and they are using AI to respond to employees' queries. And what they don't realize sometimes is when they're putting in case information or employee information, unless it's an actual company account, all of that information is searchable and can be found. So you may have an employee who then comes back to you with quite a serious case of their data being found online. So again, it's around how do you lock down and protect that. Next one, Michaela. Okay, AI policies in place. Again, yeah, we'll cover off some of this, because then within your AI policy, are you covering off disciplinary and grievance processes and policies in that? And that's more so what I'm referring to, employee relations within the AI space. Okay. Again, I'll talk about data privacy with AI in relation to the, obviously I'm going to talk about the new Employment Act anyway, but also AI in HR and again, the trends we're seeing. So data privacy is a big one. We're seeing a huge increase in subject access requests, not just from employees to clients, but also from employees to external consultancies like ourselves. So where a client would bring in a HR consultancy to deal with a grievance or an investigation. Next thing is we will get a subject access request as well. So it's also about ensuring data across your contractors or consultants is correct. Okay, Michaela, I think, yeah, no, Michaela, I won't use that question. I want to move on to the employee relations stuff because I've got tons of the updates to cover. So, Michaela, I'll go back to sharing if that's okay.
Yeah, you can.
No. Okay. So, understanding employment law. So, again, in terms of understanding employment law, and I suppose assessing the level of experience we have on the call, obviously it's always difficult in a webinar until you sit down and have a coffee with someone and understand. Realistically, in terms of your business, you need to understand it and you need to be aware of what's changing, because some of those changes are required by law, but also they will require updates to your contracts, updates to your policies. Your staff will be very, very aware of these. So again, it's around being prepared if a staff member comes and raises a query or a question. The other reason it's very important, and even more so than ever, so we're dealing with what we have is effectively you have a system in the UK that was very much so backlogged after COVID. Now, on top of COVID, what you then have is you have the increased use of AI. So what you are seeing is, because employees that maybe previously would have been too lazy to go and lodge a grievance, they're sitting at their PC, they're drafting their grievance thoughts, and it's coming out like an employment lawyer, and the business gets that and they're completely scared because, again, it sounds like they've gone and sought legal advice. So because of that, you're seeing a knock-on effect. So you're seeing ACAS being contacted more than ever. So every single day I'm getting emails from ACAS. Usually what would happen is, when we would deal with a client and we would deal with an internal process, we would finish that process and you may never hear from the employee again. Now we're getting ACAS calls or emails after every single case that we've dealt with, which again is a noticeable difference to where we would have been last year. So you're seeing a 39% rise in employment tribunals. You're seeing almost 7,000 additional claims a year. Now, don't forget that with the reform that they put in around the new Employment Act, realistically, that number is only going to go up, because already you have the backlog of ACAS, you have a backlog still of COVID. So after COVID, a lot of the cases were taking anywhere between 18 months and 24 months to hit tribunal, which is a huge amount of time. If you're an employee sitting around in a really, really bad case that you've been treated really badly with or unfairly, that's a long wait. It's playing on your mind. You've got lawyers involved. There's a lot of work getting those packs together and so on. So this is only going up, and that is exactly what we're seeing. You're then seeing after ACAS that lengthy wait. So the minute you finish dealing with ACAS, so a lot of what will happen at the moment is you finish dealing with the internal case, you get a phone call from ACAS. They will say to you, we want to have a discussion with you. You were the HR consultant dealing with this, or they'll deal with the business directly and they'll say, we have a case through from John Murphy, and he is looking to take you to tribunal for unfair dismissal, constructive dismissal, discrimination, and they'll give you a figure and they'll talk about what he's discussed with them. At that stage, then what will happen is the employer or the HR consultant will either open a negotiation or conciliation or not. At that stage, and if you've gone through this is why your process is being mapped out really clearly, and going through that process is so important, because that is where, if you have any flaws in your process, you will find out that you will be settling through ACAS very quickly. You won't even be getting to tribunal. Now, in some ways, that's a good thing, but I'll talk about that in a second. So there's 531,000 Opal tribunal claims at the moment. Again, there are claims that we're dealing with that won't be hitting tribunal for 18 months. So again, you can imagine the stress that brings to a business over those 18 months while it's constantly lingering. Don't forget, if you sell a business, also in your due diligence, a lot of that will be looked at very, very carefully. The volume of claims will be looked at. So what we're seeing is more claims, longer delays, bigger awards landing at the same time, We at the moment have a couple of clients where they have 2 and 3 different tribunals going on. Again, it would have been managed very well all the way through, but again, it's a free-for-all for employees that are disgruntled in that they've removed the fee that they used to have to pay to take a company to tribunal. So be aware of that. The cost of, so it's about, this is about also proactively dealing with it rather than reactively dealing with it, because the cost of getting the people decisions wrong is climbing. And as I said, alongside that, with the delays and the system within the UK, the AI element is adding a new layer of exposure. So I just thought it would be useful to cover, you know, the key, yes, while we're talking about the Employment Right Bill and the Act, etc., I thought it would be useful to cover off a couple of the other important ones. So Equality Act, obviously around discrimination, etc., Working Time Regulations, National Minimum Wage Act, Health and Safety at Work Act, and obviously you've got changes all the time with GDPR Act in the UK coming. So very, very important. Now, the bill, in terms of being an act, in terms of the biggest, sorry, now excuse me for the background interference at the moment. Just bear with me a second. So in terms of the bill obviously being passed, and I think the nervousness last year was they were talking of a lot of new changes, but they hadn't been implemented and we had no idea of when they were coming. That has already started. So the scope of the act is the new bill, I suppose, is a better word for it. It touches every part of the employment relationship. Everything from dismissal, harassment, sick pay, family leave, 0 hours, fire and rehire. And to explain that to some of you who may not be experienced with that is, sometimes in bigger corporate businesses where you've got big headcount, what would happen is they want to restructure, they go through a mass fire and rehire process. And it could be around changing T's and C's, it could be around changing jobs, workloads, etc. So again, it's very, very, they wanted to stop all of that, so it's very much employee driven. But again, and it's about increasing those protections around employees, redundancy consultations, there's changes, and trade unions. Now, the rollout for this is all across this year. Some of it's already been done. And then obviously next year there will be updates coming regularly. So it's very important that you either subscribe to somebody like ourselves, or that you may subscribe to multiple information helplines or consultants in general, because realistically, if you're getting the updates on your email subscriptions, again, it's just adding education to your, it's adding flavor, and it's adding updates that you should be thinking about, even when you're having a coffee and your lunch, whatever, and you're thinking, right, okay, I need to make my to-do list, and this is something that I need to speak to my team about. The big one that everyone was talking about was this day one unfair dismissal, because it was banded about quite a lot, and I know the HR consultants were very stressed out, because realistically the feedback was, well, how are we going to deal with day one unfair dismissal? Clients were getting really stressed, because the problem then is, if you've got day one unfair dismissal, don't forget at the moment it's 2 years before you can leave an employer and take an unfair dismissal case. How do you control that? How do you manage it in terms of everybody can walk into your business on day one, resign or walk out, and then obviously you're dealing with an unfair dismissal claim, which is really frustrating. So again, there was going to be a huge problem as to how they control all of that. How do you then ensure that businesses can operate if, for example, the day one rights impact people recruiting people? So what would have happened was people would stop recruiting, they would start managing probation periods, probably a lot stronger, maybe short probation periods, they would probably start taking on more fixed term contracts and so on. So thankfully that hasn't happened, but what is happening is January 2027, if you're not aware already, anybody who's in your organization, so it's already kicked in from the 1st of January. So 1st of January 2026, don't forget, by the time they reach 6 months, it will be the 1st of January 2027. So, sorry, 1st of July, hopefully I said that right. 1st of July 2026 will mean they're in your business on the 1st of January 2027, and they will already fall under the unfair dismissal, the 6-month unfair dismissal rules, because their probation will be finished and they will have full entitlement to take you to court for unfair dismissal. So again, just be thinking about that, be careful, start to talk to your teams, what approach you want to take, and so on. Again, it's very important you involve your leaders in this, because they need to understand that they need to educate themselves. They need to be able to ask questions, whether it's yourself or it's a HR consultant you work with. But it's also around educating them on the cost of potential claims in this space. In February 2026, obviously you've got industrial action. Now again, we deal with a lot of SMEs, we deal with a lot of corporates. You don't see as much industrial action in SMEs sometimes, but again, what they're protecting is employees who take part in industrial action. So what they're saying is they should be entitled to take part. If there is any if there's any dismissals because they're taking part in industrial action, it would be classed as unfair. Okay, statutory sick pay has already changed. As I said, we've got a lot of accountants on the call. You guys will have been all over this from the 1st of April because you will probably have a number of clients asking you. You will have to have made adjustments to payroll for people already because of the new rules. So statutory sick pay goes in from day one. You've got changes to paternity, unpaid parental leave. Again, some customers will say to me, Maria, like these are like 10 extra policies around harassment, whistleblowing, parental leave, paternity leave. Do I need to sit down and write all of these policies? And I would say, you know, I would think you definitely need to have your basic policies in place, but realistically, you know, it is okay as well that if you've got somebody coming to you asking about paternity leave or parental leave or anything like that maybe you don't have, to then say, okay, do you know what, I will go away and I'll find an answer for you on your question, let me come back to you, and then sit down with them and you can share a policy. But again, it's around, sometimes clients like to, if they have the basic policies in place, they like to create them as they go, which is nothing wrong with that. Just again, it's about trying to make sure your foundations are in place from a HR point of view. Yes, it's better to have your policies from day one, but again, you may see new things that come up in conversations that probably a lot of businesses won't have a policy for. So October 2026, so this is a really interesting one because we do lots of training on this one. So you have to make sure by October 2026 that you have reasonable steps in your business to prevent sexual harassment. Now, what does that mean? Have they got the access to report it? Are you training on it? Are you treating any complaints about sexual harassment seriously? Are you appointing the right people to hear any complaints about that? Are you looking after your third-party contractors? So don't forget, third-party contractors come into this now. So if you are a business that have, you know, cleaning contractors, or we often see, you know, M&E engineers out on site, and they will be providing maintenance to different companies across different offices, they have to be protected. But also the people they talk to in the other businesses also have to be protected. So again, it's very important that within any tender processes or any, you know, T's and C's on new contracts that you're working with, that are you checking, is there a section in there around, you know, expectations around training and development, and more training that's linked to compliance. Very, very important. And then obviously we spoke a little bit about it already for January 2027. Big one you need to watch out for is unfair dismissal. Now, what I would say to you about the unfair dismissal one from January 2027, which is the most important one, is if you have not made changes already, or if you haven't been speaking to anybody about this, realistically, what you should be doing is, first thing I would be doing is looking at your probation period. So what we're recommending clients do is they shorten, if their probation period is 6 months at the moment, what we're recommending is that they would shorten that period to 3, 4, 5 months. Again, some clients are very reluctant to just have a 3-month period. However, what would happen is, if they're it all depends on how well your managers are going to manage that. If your managers are very comfortable with probation conversations, they're very good at filling out documentation, they set the reminders when the person starts and so on, then you probably have 4 or 5 months of a probation opportunity. If your business is not overly organized sometimes in terms of probation, I would probably be saying to you, look at 3 months, look at 4 months, because it gives you the opportunity then to have the safety net that if it's not being done, you can still extend, or if it's being done but there's need for extension, you can still extend that period. So that's really, really important. There's nothing wrong with extending the probation periods, but the new rule will mean that extending it beyond 6 months from January will leave you probably in hot water. Now, Ireland already have implemented this ages ago, but Ireland are behind on other things. So, for example, auto-enrollment for pensions, the UK are way ahead of Ireland on that. So again, there are different things creeping in from other countries as well. There was also discussion about the right to switch off policy. I didn't put it on this because it's not been signed off in terms of the bill, and it probably won't come. But again, in Ireland they have similar, France similar, and what that would then create issues for is if you've got work WhatsApp groups. So thankfully that hasn't gone into motion, and hopefully it won't. But again, it's about you thinking about, you know, the mediums you're using for communication in your organization. You know, if you've got Teams group, do you keep it to business times? Have you got a policy around communication in the organization? A lot of businesses using business WhatsApp. Are they using that on personal phones? Are they using it on business phones? So again, have a think about all of that stuff. It's really, really important. The other thing around the sexual harassment piece is linked to whistleblowing. So they're saying what the rules are now is they're saying raising a sexual harassment concern is now a protected disclosure. Okay, so dismissing or penalising the complaint is very high risk. And I suppose if we think back to, and we do cover this in some of our training, the Me Too era, you had the guy from MasterChef. We do some training on that episode. There's a lot of the conversations that come up in some of the training linked to Jeffrey Epstein. Again, they're not obviously conversations that are very pleasant to have, but we use some of them to express to staff that you need to be able to talk about this in your workplace. Leaders need to be aware of what they can and can't say and what is appropriate and what's not appropriate. So again, very, very important that you're on top of every single area of this. Day one family leave, again, that is constantly changing as well. Another one that's very, very important is flexible working. Now that's gone into place already. You do not have to be in a business 26 weeks anymore. You do not have to only apply. You used to be limited as to the amount of flexible working requests you could put in. Now you can put in 2. Again, flexible working policies are very important. So have you got a policy? What happens when you get a flexible working policy? Are you outlining the rules within that policy? Absolutely essential. But then are you having a flexible working hearing to understand, can you accommodate this or not? And are you thinking about all of the areas as to why you would refuse something? So there is a criteria around flexible working that you need to be able to kind of talk through and justify. But again, it is as formal a process as a disciplinary or a grievance type policy or process. Yeah. Now, we've talked a little bit about those. The 0-hour workers is a really interesting one, actually, because we've been waiting for this to change, because we do have a number of sports clients that have a lot of their work can be seasonal. It can be heavier at weekends, if they're operating sports facilities. Some of their workers can do coaching, for example, tennis coaching, but they also will work on a 0-hour contract because they want to have the ability to do both. A lot of our hospitality clients were running whole restaurants on 0-hour contracts. Now, I'm not saying that always works. You need to have a core team, of course. But again, it's going to be something that if it comes, it's going to be really, really serious, I think, for a lot of our clients anyway, on the basis that how are they obviously, sometimes it's not the best from a staff point of view, and you can understand why they may be introducing that. That whole eradication of 0-hour contracts, but if there may be reform more than complete eradication, who knows? But again, it's about trying to make sure that staff are getting guaranteed hours. But again, where your work is seasonal, or it is a hospitality, or even a sports industry type business, restaurants, maybe leisure facilities that are more popular in the summer, that is how some of these businesses have been surviving, and surviving well. I'm not saying they treat their staff any differently, but again, it's just around, it will have a huge impact on businesses in the UK if that happens. Now, AI frontline. So again, we are seeing employees or ex-employees who would have just sometimes previously drifted into the sunset, but now we're seeing the 10, 15-page grievance arriving. We're seeing the sexual harassment complaints. We're seeing, it's mostly grievances, being honest. I think what you will see in relation to disciplinaries or investigations is they may be a lot more prepped coming in, because they may be using a ChatGPT to feed in what exactly the company is inviting them for. They may feed in the letter. And if they feed in an invite to an investigation or a disciplinary letter into ChatGPT, they will probably get a whole guidance process or manual to help them get through that type of an experience. But again, I'll talk about grievances. So businesses are getting worried. They're seeing the long grievances coming. They're then either going straight to their lawyers, which is an increased cost, or they're going to their HR consultants, and they're thinking, well, this is way above my head. I can't deal with this. And then, for example, what will happen is the HR consultant will sometimes sit with them and they will say to them, now, hang on a sec, let's just go back to base. They're getting overly scared when they see the grievance coming in. But again, if you go through some of that detail and you take the waffle out of that, a lot of the time it's around what's the substance behind what they're raising. So I'll talk to you about grievance, for example. I would have recently, and it would have covered off maternity discrimination, it would have covered off pay and promotion, it would have covered off harassment, bullying, derogatory comments, deduction of wages, financial manipulation, and all of this was coming in the one grievance. So it was quite a meaty one. But when you go into each of that and you sit with the employee, within that grievance hearing, and you talk to them and you say, okay, you've raised discrimination. Talk me through what that means in terms of what your thinking is around why you're complaining. You will have, you need to get your specifics on each of those complaints that they're raising. So, for example, we had a lady in a grievance hearing or disciplinary process last week, and she said to the HR consultant, the company are only firing me because I'm black. So immediately the HR consultant will say, okay, appreciate your comment. Can you give me some reasoning or, your thought process as to what's happened? Have you had, has there been any conversations? Have they used derogatory language towards you? Have they told you that, etc.? And then what's happened is the employee has no, the claims are completely substantiated or, completely false, completely misrepresented, and there are no witnesses to collaborate or clarify what they are raising. So again, don't be afraid to face into some of these things with the right support, but also, again, that initial frightening grievance that may come, take a step back, get some advice, get the right advice, and then, for example, break it down. And again, sit down and do your grievance hearing with your employee and so on. I've covered a good bit of this already. I suppose what I was talking about earlier in the call is the piece around the increased usage of AI, the legal language that's coming with that and not being afraid of that, the increase of the cost to your business because you are getting more grievances. So again, if your communication is good in your business, if your engagement is good in your business, if you have managers who are trained to deal well with your people, that will be half of the battle. So what we had seen as a consultancy during COVID was a lot of the recruitment budgets had fallen away because companies were panicking. How do we do business in this new way of working? How do we do business when half of the world is shut down? And only recently have we seen, so recruitment budgets were kind of shut down. The training budgets were also impacted massively. A lot of training across clients stopped completely. But what we are seeing opening up since the beginning of the year is management training. So, for example, if you think of your management team, you'll have technical aspects of their job depending on what company they're in, but you'll also have stuff like people management, operations, employee relations, diversity and inclusion. Again, it's about giving them the skills, performance management reviews, how to carry out an effective review, how to carry out an effective probation review, setting expectations, smart objectives, and so on. So again, not entirely linked to the conversation today of employee relations, but again, if you're managing a people strategy proactively, you will not be in the situation where you're dealing with employee relations issues because you're already thinking about the really good stuff. So a lot of the conversations we will have with businesses is, okay, so you've got a really good business plan. What's your plan for the next 12, 24 months? You want to hire people, okay. You want to train people. You want to increase engagement in your company. You want to increase turnover by 50 million, whatever it is. And then we will say, okay, now we build the people strategy off the back of that to include engagement. We may have stuff on there around compensation and benefits. You may have training. You may have succession planning. You may have you could have something like cross-training your workforce so you can use them in multiple areas. You may have brand reputation, employee engagement from a Glassdoor point of view. The list is endless. So again, by thinking proactively about that, you're not going to be sitting talking about employee relations issues. So we've had a really interesting meeting today with the business who opened in a new region. And a fantastic business, and we've worked with them on an ad hoc basis over the last 12 months. And this is very understandable because sometimes HR will be the last priority left because, again, you're firefighting, you're managing different costs and so on. But they're at the stage now where they understand the need for the proactive type strategic support versus the day-to-day administration and the reactive tactical operational type support. And that's just the growth journey they're on. But again, now our work with them will be getting the HR audit done. Where are there gaps? Where are there any loopholes we need to look at? Where are there policies missing? And how do we then strategically look at, okay, let's think about the next 12 months and the next 24 months. So that's really, really important. In terms of case studies, there are tons, and I suppose the useful part of what we would talk about also with businesses is they'll always say to me, Maria, when I get a grievance or they dismiss somebody that's talking even about constructive dismissal, they will say, well, what is the cost of this case You know, what is the cost of the case to my business if somebody's unfairly dismissed? Don't forget, it's not just about the cost of the actual claims they're taking. There could be elements of that which could be injury of law or injury of feelings. There could be loss of wages. So if they're out of the business for the last 3 months, they're taking a claim against you and they're going through the motions of ACAS, or they go through the motions with tribunal. Don't forget that loss of earnings for even 18 months could be taken into account. So what you find then is if you haven't won your claim or your fight against your employee, is there is a huge list of a bill of all of these different elements of the claim that you may be required to pay. And don't forget also, if you win a claim, you will have a situation where you won't be able to recuperate any of the cost from employees, because again, you can't do that as an employer. The employees won't have that money to pay for those costs. So again, very, very important. I spoke earlier a little bit about a post I had on LinkedIn. And I spoke about a huge engagement that we had with it on the basis of the system and how it's working. So you may go through ACAS, you may go through tribunal all the way, and you may have spent £20,000 getting there on average, right? Basic case, and you win the case, and the employee loses. But really, in your heart, it's not a win, because if you think about it, that £20,000 to your business is a huge amount of money. So effectively, there is no rebate, nothing to come, to the judge or the tribunal. Where's my 20,000? Unfortunately, that's just how it's set up. The system will change or not, I don't know. But again, it feels very unfair for employers. In terms of what we would to see as HR consultants, it would be that type of a or some way of triaging, so teams coming in with the force behind them. Yes, there is big risk here, it is going to tribunal, and we may look at a settlement agreement. How do they balance them out? Because realistically, at the moment, they're treating every claim the same. So that's really, really important. In terms of settlement agreements as well, I suppose it's important to mention that if you're used to dealing with these, we don't always recommend settling with staff. However, sometimes you have to be pragmatic. We get a lot of clients that will come to us and say, Maria, I'm really, really upset about this case. This was a staff member that's worked with me for years. I'm really upset. I'm really frustrated. I've treated the person really, really well. They're slagging off my business. They've defamed my character. Can I take them to court for defamation of character or slander? And what our employment lawyer will always say to them, that's for the Kardashians, that's for the rich and famous. We don't encourage taking those cases against employees because they're extremely costly. But also, it's not even that. With our employment lawyer, or one approach with this kind of thing and settlement agreements in general is, number one, we don't create a culture of settlement agreements in your organization, because if you open that kind of worms up, you will always be dealing with it. But the second thing is, where the approach, we want the most pragmatic approach for yourself and your employee. We don't want you to be spending unnecessary money. We want, where we need an employee effectively to go away, if that's how you want to badge it. But again, by signing them into a settlement agreement is around that confidentiality aspect, which will protect your brand. But also there's the element of they can't speak about that with any other staff or, outside of the agreement. And then there's the protection within the settlement agreement for claims. Some of you may know that already. So they're signing away the right to a claim. Again, in the accountancy world, I suppose what's very important is that if you're asked to process any type of ex gratia payments within settlement agreements, really, really important as the finance and compliance that you manage, that that is something that you're aware of in terms of what can be ex gratia and what can't. So for example, and I know I'm drifting off a little bit here instead of our case studies, but I do have I'm watching the time and I want to make sure that I'm talking to you about stuff that is more relevant day to day with the types of topic of like a settlement agreement. So for example, where ex gratia payments come in, where contractual notice would be owed to an employee, you can't just go and pay contractual notice to an employee by an ex gratia payment, because effectively they would be taxed on that notice anyway. So that's really, really important. So that's just a couple of hot tips there. Okay, so in terms of case studies, again, what's going to be really, really important if we think about, dismissal, disability discrimination, monitoring performance in the probation period is going to be absolutely key. So what is this unfair dismissal change going to ensure that you need to do? Number one with that is you're going to need to be tighter around your recruitment. Your job descriptions, your KPIs, what are you looking for when you go out to the market? what are the character profiles and the culture and values of the people that you bring into your organization? Let's agree all of that first before you go out into the market for your employees. Then the next thing will be the induction. So inducting people, planned, structured, different people in those first month, 2 months that they meet. They do the training, they complete the paperwork. You need to make sure that in those 2 areas you are ticking the boxes: recruitment, induction, and then onboarding, all very closely linked. If you do that very well, you will have no issue with your 1st of January deadline. Then the next part for me, which is part 4, is the probation management. Have you got probation forms? Have you got a probation policy? What are you expecting when you sit down on day 1 with those employees to see when you get to month 2 or month 3? So really, really important. And are the objectives smart? We need to be realistic. So are you setting them objectives that are not like 50 objectives that they're never realistically going to meet? Or are you setting 2 or 3 key areas where you know they're achievable and they're, but you put a little bit of a stretch in there as well, which is really important. So this one example isn't just ER linked. So a firm used a productivity monitoring tool that scored staff on activity. 2 people in the bottom band were put on capability plans and later dismissed. One had reduced hours adjustments for a disability, which had dragged her activity score down. And we're going to talk about disability discrimination in a second. She claimed unfair dismissal and disability discrimination and filed a data subject access request. So I spoke a little bit earlier about that. The employer couldn't answer because the vendor wouldn't explain the scoring. So again, very, very important around your recruitment documentation. So again, what they do, they had to settle this lady out of the business, legal fees, management time, and the tool was removed from the organization. Now, there is nothing wrong with some of these tools as long as you're implementing them correctly. What the tools like AI won't have is the human element. So if you have 2 people working the same job, and their needs to deliver that job are different, you will need to be thinking about reasonable adjustments for somebody with a disability. That's not to say that they will not be able to do the job to the same level as the other person, but again, realistically, have you carried out the reasonable adjustments to support the person deliver the job? So you can see why that person would have taken an unfair dismissal claim. You can see why they would have taken a disability discrimination claim. And again, because they didn't think about the detail behind it potentially. So again, if anybody has any situations like this that they'd love to have a coffee or a talk about, please pick up the phone, drop me an email, we can jump on a call. It's also about making the workplace accessible for people with disabilities. Really, really important. So monitoring scores are important, KPIs are important, bandings around different criteria for your probations now and your performance reviews. But again, you must document the meaning or the explanation for some of those different key KPIs or different scoring mechanisms. Now, the next one is an AI drafted grievance and the confidentiality breach. So this is what I talked about at the very beginning. A manager found an employee had pasted client data into a public AI tool to speed up reports. Again, that would be really embarrassing for your business. So if you're using AI in your business, that you need to be thinking about the training policy, the training behind that, the locking things down, the audits around the security of that, and so on. So during the disciplinary, the employee submitted a long, polished, legally worded grievance alleging inconsistent treatment because a colleague had done the same thing but had no consequences. So again, if you're dealing with disciplinary hearings, be very, very mindful that how you have treated your last few claims in the similar type of theme is very important, because people will often be hearing about that from other employees and they will be then talking about, but you didn't dismiss Jane for the exact same thing and she's using AI for financial reporting. This could be the example that you use. So with no policies in place, you are completely wide open, but inconsistency also around the process is something you need to think about. Fair treatment, but also creating the adjustments for anybody who can't be treated fairly or can't be treated the same because of something like a disability. So watch-outs are responding to the substance of an AI drafted grievance, not its length. Forget about the polish, as I said to you. Forget about the 30 pages. You go zoom in on the detail. Don't dismiss a complaint because it looks AI written. So some people will just say to me, Maria, here, I've got a complaint. It's been written by ChatGPT. I'm not stupid. She can wait until I have time to get back to her because I'm not dealing with this now. Treat it like anything else, any other grievance policy, any other grievance within your policy, and so on. Discipline AI misuse under existing conduct rules, but again, set your structure for that around their daily work and their daily job. And then if you're seeing that that's not being utilized, or they're not abiding by the rules, then you start your investigations around that. So again, the root cause of this was the policy vacuum. Again, we're introducing lots of new stuff all the time, new systems, new processes. Have we got policies around systems or anything new we're bringing into the business? A lot of businesses are building AI workflows, cloud agents, all of that sort of stuff. Again, I would be nervous about that without any type of training or material, as well as, it can be consistent. So what we're doing with our team at the moment is we are just doing our data protection audit across the organization. And then what we will do is we will do a full launch of whatever system we're going to go with across the team. And then start to embed it properly, but take it step by step. Now, so that is the end of my presentation. There has been tons of topics discussed, so apologies, I've gone extremely quick, but I wanted to leave some proper time at the end for questions. We will share these, of course. But yeah, I just wanted to open up the floor, Liz, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, that was so much information. I'm sure that everybody found that really valuable. We do have some questions. So, if an AI or monitoring tool influenced a disciplinary or dismissal in your organisation, could you defend that decision at a tribunal?
I suppose it would depend on the case. I would never rely on AI decisions around disciplinary or a grievance outcome. Okay. Because again, have they got all the information? Have they seen all of the documents? We are testing some of this at the moment because we're an organization like everybody on the call. We need to be super efficient. So what we are testing is cases where we are uploading all of the pack. And we are testing to see how good it is in summarizing it. However, there has to be the human element. We will often, don't forget, AI can hallucinate at times. And I'm not a tech expert, or I'm not an AI expert by any means, so please forgive me. But I'm learning. To learn as a business owner, of course. But the thing is I have seen, and Fiona, who's our finance director, is testing financial modeling, and because it's not about shortcutting on our work, it's about creating efficiencies around the time we're spending on client work, so that they're not being billed for hours and hours. We would spend hours on a grievance or a disciplinary, whereas now it's reducing that time and billing time for customers. So it's creating that. So Liz, my answer to that would be, sorry, I'm kind of going around the house on that. I would use it alongside your proper documentation, your policy and your packs, but also I would have a HR consultant or somebody who's experienced in dealing with those cases making the assessment. Because if a HR consultant is going into a disciplinary outcome and they're delivering an outcome that they felt that, AI can check it and can give you a second opinion, no problem. But I wouldn't be solely basing my outcome on that, because again, when that disciplinary or grievance appeal comes back, you need to be able, another HR consultant or another manager will walk in and do the review of the case, and they might completely overturn the case that you're after dealing with, which would be really embarrassing.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot from law firms at the moment where everybody feels AI is a great tool, but it's also a people pleaser. So it doesn't like to say no. It doesn't like to say, I don't know. And there have been situations where the AI tool has actually made up some case law, and then
exactly that.
gone to partner with that, and more experienced people in the industry have said, well, I've never heard of that before, looked into it, and it was completely fictional, because the AI doesn't like to say, I don't know. It likes to find the solution. So you do need to be careful with it.
That you have raised one of the first shocking discoveries I made when HR consultants were saying to me, I've just this, I fed in the case, and the case law, it's making up the case law. Can you imagine me going back to a client referring to a case and it making it up on AI? But it's not even that. I think, like, I tested it recently on a fairly meaty case, and don't underestimate the size of these packs sometimes. You use it for efficiencies, but you still need to go back and triple check dates. Sometimes I'll find it'll put in stuff like Monday the 7th when Monday will have been the 8th, and that's really embarrassing if that's wrong. So there's definitely stuff it's trying to people please with, but then there's the element of, I find that it is not as thorough as you going through that information, because how it's reading, it will still never pick up the human feeling of being in that room having that discussion. That's the key. So just watch out for that.
Yeah. One more question.
Yeah.
So we're a small team, and HR paperwork isn't always watertight. With the unfair dismissal window dropping to 6 months and staff now using AI to write up grievances, how worried should I be realistically? And what's the one thing you tell me to fix first?
Well, we've covered quite a bit, haven't we? You're probably thinking, God, I'm leaving here with a huge to-do list. I don't think there's need to be worried, because you could lie awake all night worrying about this stuff. I think if you run a fairly good business and you've integrity as a leader, your business will be fairly well oiled. Okay. I think, again, depending on your headcount, there are a lot of free resources out there. I would be looking at your employee handbook, going through to review that. Is it up to date with for day one SSP? Is it up to date with your updated probation policy? Are your contracts, have you changed your probation policy within your contracts? And then what I would be doing is I would be kind of implementing, your probation form. Really, before you sit down and you advertise a vacancy, speaking to your people and saying, right, okay, we've got this vacancy, who's doing first stage, who's doing second stage, what exactly is key for this role and what are we looking for? So again, areas for me would be tightening up in your recruitment process, your induction process, and your onboarding. Because if those three are really good quality, you've ended with the right people at the end of that. And I'm not saying that that's going to solve every problem, but the reason people leave businesses within the first 3 months usually is because the recruitment and the induction has been poor. The reason they leave after that is because they've been the wrong sort of choice for the organization. Do you get me? So your recruitment and your kind of induction and onboarding is hugely underestimated at times. And people say to me, well, Maria, if I'm recruiting just for the culture of my organization, surely I've got the right person. Well, yeah, but you need to ensure they can technically do the job. You can need to ensure that their values set to your organization, as I said already, but also you need to ensure.
Oh, she's just frozen a bit there. So we shall wait and see if she comes back. But I think she answered. Oh, we lost you a bit there, Maria. I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah, and I think we'll just call it there. Sorry, we lost you for a minute. What I will say, I think we'll probably wrap up. We haven't got any more questions at the moment. Often with these cases, people go away, they have a think, and then they do think of a question. So if anybody wants to put any questions to me, then I will forward your details on to Maria and then put you in contact with her. I'd want to thank you so much for doing this for us today, especially when you're obviously mid-travelling as well, and all the complications that brings.
Yeah, sorry about this. I got delayed in the meeting earlier. Usually I'm in a room and I'm quiet, it's very quiet. So sorry about that. But yeah, any topic, any questions, Liz? Exactly. Any topic, any questions? No question is a silly question, people. So yeah, please feel free to drop me a line.
Okay. For everybody else, we're taking a break over the summer. We'll be back in the September with our next webinar, and we'll send information out on that soon. But thank you very much, Maria and Signature Associates, for today. And everybody have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.